And it's my distinct pleasure and honour to introduce a stalwart in Up With People, Dr. Carolyn Lee, who has been associated with Up With People for around 28 years or so. And she hates me when I say that, but I'm going to say it anyway. Carolyn is a professional trainer, public speaker, motivator, and educator. And every year, Carolyn comes back to staging from her home in Dallas to share some experiences and a little word of advice that she's gained after 28 years of speaking to Up With People students and staff. Every year, Carolyn is asked to come back, and every year she's like, all right, one more time. And staging just wouldn't be the same without Dr. Carolyn Lee. And I won't say any more except introduce her. Please welcome Dr. Carolyn Lee.
Well, to me, actually I come twice a year, every staging. And it always seems to me like about 5 minutes since I have stood here before. You know, I was just thinking while I was sitting over there that the years go by and I get older and older and you don't. How does that work? Well, as David said, I have been doing this for a lot of years. I first became associated with Up With People in 1971. But I have been coming to do this very thing since 1986. It never occurred to me when I first wrote this speech that I would be doing it semi-annually for the rest of my natural life. My intention actually was to do it once, but it seemed to strike a chord or something. And one thing I do want to tell you is that although I've done it many, 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 many times, it always seems kind of fresh to me. You know, once I get it, sometimes I do think, I can't say this anymore. I cannot say it, I've said it, and that's it. But every time I get up here and I see your faces, it's like showbiz, you know, let's have another go at it. I was living in Tucson. This is the most geographical group of people I have ever spoken to. You cannot mention the name of a place on the globe that doesn't get some good woo-woo. I'm not from Dallas, by the way. I'm from Fort Worth. There is... All right. But now what I'm going to tell you is when I lived in Tucson and Up With People was headquartered there. This was back in the early 80s. All right, no more woo-woos, please. I'll cue you when that's appropriate. And I read in the Tucson newspaper that Vic Braden, who at the time was an American tennis pro who did a lot of teaching, was coming to Tucson, and he was going to offer a seminar at the local Holiday Inn or someplace for women who needed to improve their tennis games. And did I just get a lot louder? Anyway, I at the time was a woman whose tennis game badly needed improving, and so I signed up for this seminar, and I went to the Holiday Inn, and I sat in a seat just like this with my spiral notebook open and my ballpoint poised, ready for some words of wisdom from this guy, and paid $25 to attend this thing. And so he told us something about the principles of good tennis playing, and we reviewed the backhand and the forehand and the grip and the lob and you know, the standard stuff. And then as he began to kind of wind this thing up, he got very intense, and he leaned across the lectern and he said, "Now I am going to give you what I consider to be the key to improving your tennis game. If you don't remember anything else I say to you today, remember this and write it down in your spiral notebook." And he said, "Keep your eye on the ball." And everybody went, you know, keep your eye on the ball. I knew keep your eye on the ball. I'd said that to myself many times. Carolyn, keep your eye on the ball. It really wasn't until I left there, it might not have even been until the next day, that I started considering what he had said. And I thought, golly, you know, when you stop to think about that, it's true. That might be the key to good tennis playing. And if you get kind of philosophical about it, it's sort of the key to a lot of other things, too. I thought what he really meant was, remember what's important. Maintain your focus. Concentrate on what really matters. Don't get sidetracked or distracted. Don't worry about the next point. Don't worry about the other players. Don't get all caught up in how darling you look in your little outfit. Don't get concerned about who plays the number one position. Just keep your eye on the ball. Geez, that is downright profound. And so simple and so to the point. I love things that are simple and to the point. It was right about that time, as a matter of fact, that I read something that I think of quite a lot. This was a little story about Dr. Karl Barth, who was a very well-known Christian theologian and writer, and he had written volumes and volumes of material on Christianity. And somebody asked him one time, probably a reporter, "Dr. Barth, could you condense everything you have ever thought and written about Christianity in one or two sentences?" And Dr. Barth, instead of saying, "Of course not, you moron," he couldn't very well do that, being a Christian theologian and thinker, said to this guy, "Yes, as a matter of fact, I can. What it all comes down to is this: Jesus loves me, this I know." Now, for you Americans, you know that "Jesus loves me, this I know" is a simple little song that kids sing in Sunday school. And he had reduced his complicated theology into two little sentences. When I was asked to speak to the Up With People cast and to tell them something significant about the experience they were embarking on, I discovered that I was not quite as pithy and to the point as Dr. Karl Barth. I couldn't reduce my remarks to one or two sentences. And if I had, Up With People probably wouldn't fly me to Denver twice a year to say them. But I have reduced my remarks to 7 what I call just truths about the Up With People experience that I thought might interest you at this stage of the game. And so I'm just going to march through those and share with you my experience. One thing David didn't say is that when I first began with Up With People, I was on the road. I was hired as a college teacher. That was back in the days when we ran a full-fledged college program, and there was Cast B, which was called the Educational Cast. And I was hired as a college teacher to travel along with them and provide courses on the road. Can you imagine such a thing? I mean, when it worked, it was wonderful, but it often didn't work because, as you can imagine, the students were tired. You know, tired? Speaking of tired, let me just inject this one little thing, and that is that I am not asking anything of you this morning except this one thing. I'm going to ask you to remain completely conscious throughout this entire speech. Now, I know that will be a struggle for some of you. Actually, if you put up a valiant battle to stay awake and you lose, I can handle that. But sometimes people seem to come here for the purpose of taking a nap. And that one I don't do well with. I have been known to come out there and rap people over the head. So if I see you dozing off, it might be necessary for me to humiliate you in front of the entire group. So just keep that in mind. All right. The first truth about the Up With People experience, and that is, by the way, what I'm talking about, the experience. I'm not talking about the organization. I'm not talking about the facility or the people who run it or even the show. What I'm talking about is what is going to happen to you out on the road. And one characteristic of that experience is that it is very, very personal. It is so personal that it's almost impossible for you to talk about it to anybody else who isn't also doing it. You will discover this in the most amusing way when you go home for the first time after having been out on the road for a while. And people will say to you, well, so, Up With People, huh? Well, how was it? How was it out there? And you'll say, oh my gosh. Well, oh, it's fine, thanks, it's fine, thanks. And really, that's about all they want to know. The truth is that if you start attempting to recreate for somebody or share with somebody this very personal experience, you will likely fail. Now, when you're talking about the experience to other members of this group, you don't even have to use words. You can just go, ha ha ha, and everybody gets it. Because it is so personal, let me tell you this about it. It is your thing. It is what happens to you. It is what happens between you and the other people in this group. It's what happens between you and members of the audience, between you and members of the staff. If this turns out to be a bummer of an experience for you, I'm afraid you're going to have to take the blame. If it turns out to be one of the all-time great experiences of your entire life, as I imagine it will, then you pretty much get to take the credit because you are in charge of a personal experience. You'll get a lot of advice, a lot of help from a lot of people, but fundamentally, you are the one who is having this experience and you are in charge of it. Now, another characteristic of the experience is that it is potentially educational. I used to just say it is educational. I have modified a few things in the speech throughout the year, and one thing is to add the word potentially, because it is not necessarily educational. If you are determined not to learn anything, I suppose you could bring it off. It would require an effort on your part, I think, not to learn a blessed thing, but I guess it's possible. I'd like to mention to you, and if you do have your pencils out, this might be a good thing to write down. I would like to mention to you what I call the learning cycle. It is a cycle that you kind of have to put yourself through if this experience you are about to have is to become educational. It won't just do it automatically. You'll kind of have to make it happen. Now, I first learned about this cycle when I came back to Up With People. See, I traveled for 3 years, 71 to 74. Then I had to take 10 years off. I was so tired. I went off and I did some other things in other places. Then in 1981, I came back, this time as educational consultant. Not just college teacher, educational consultant. Now, I had never been an educational consultant, and Up With People had never had one, so none of us had any idea what we were doing. And so I decided that at first that I would go to the library every day and I would read about experiential learning, which of course sort of goes against the whole point of experiential learning, but it was a place to begin. So I went to the library and I started reading, and one of the first things I learned about experiential learning is that experience does not necessarily equal learning. In order for experience to equal learning, this learning cycle has to occur, and that's what I'm going to tell you about. Experiential learning works this way. You begin with action. Boom, you're in an experience, you have it. Something happens to you, or you initiate some action. Now, I can't even begin to tell you how much action you are going to be involved in this year. Experience after experience after experience. But in order to turn them into learning, at some point another step has to happen, the next step has to happen, and that is reflection. At some point, you have to kind of sit down on the edge of your bed at night or someplace and say, what do you suppose that meant? What was going on there today? Now, there are going to be times when you're not quite sure. I would suggest, though, that you go ahead with the next step, which is documentation. How many of you are keeping journals? Excellent. I'd love to ask you that at the end of the year and see how many of you have kept it up. When I was traveling those 3 years, I kept journals. In fact, I still have them. They were little books like this, and I wrote 12 of them during 3 years. I stayed in 91 host homes and traveled to Europe 3 times, and of course all over this country. So I've got a lot, this is quite a volume of material. Every now and then I just have a look at it. I remember the first time I took those books down off the shelf. This was after probably 2 or 3 years. And just read straight through them. Started at the beginning and just read straight through. And I mean, these were page turners, I was turning the page going, oh my gosh, look what's happening to her now. Forgetting sometimes that the her involved in all this was me. I was here, I was there, I was with this person, I was that person, I was doing this, I was doing that. I mean, when you're out on the road, something happens every single day that's worth writing about. Sometimes when you're at home, days can go by and not much of anything happens that's worth writing about. So anyway, there is the matter of documentation, not just writing things down. You're carrying cameras, are you not? Yes. Taking pictures and just saving things, I've been on the road with people who've saved everything under the sun, from, beer coasters to small sections of toilet paper from all over the world. Well, toilet paper and other things, just kind of bring it all back. You look at that and you think, oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember that. Concerning the pictures that you're taking, my advice to you would be to label them carefully. You think you will always remember where that was and where you were, but I am here to tell you that you will not always remember. A few years ago, a student of mine was getting ready to go to Spain with her mother, and I said, oh, I have some wonderful pictures of Spain when I was there with people. Come on over and I'll show you. So she and her mother came over, and I set up my slide projector, and I started projecting these shots, which I had not labeled. And I said, oh, yes, here we are in that lovely little town of, some lovely little town. And here we are standing by the river, what was that river? I don't know, some river in that lovely little town. And here I am standing by my good friend, what was her name? Anyway, I felt like an idiot while I was showing these pictures. And so I would suggest to you that you might want to just scribble on them somewhere, so someday you will sound reasonably intelligent when you show them to somebody. Okay, so you have the experience, you reflect upon it, you document it. At some point along the line, and these stages don't necessarily have to come in this order, but at some stage right around here, we hope that you are beginning to have some understanding of what is happening to you. It doesn't necessarily come with the experience. You don't necessarily understand what has happened to you at the end of the day. You might have to document it before you understand it. It might be when you look back upon it some time from now that it sort of dawns on, oh yeah, now I see what the significance of that was. Or I see it as the beginning of something that began to happen to me. You can't always identify those things when they are happening. So understanding is what you were after. Then once you begin to understand things, you start to see certain principles at work. I mean, this is how we learn about life. Oh, this is how life works. This is how relationships work. This is how it feels when that begins to happen. You start seeing principles. And once you've seen principles, you can start drawing conclusions. Aha, since this seems to be the way things work, I believe in this or that. It is my belief, my theory, my thought that this is the way the world works. Okay, now you've just about gotten to the point where if you have another experience, if you're involved in another action and you can apply some of these things that you've begun to understand and see principles in, the new experience is much richer for you. You've grown some. You've learned some things. And what I'm talking about, I mean, it doesn't happen in this tidy fashion. You know, Up With People is a big mess sometimes when you're out there having the experience. But one thing that writing does is help you get it organized and to see it clearly and to see it sequentially. And if you do that, I can pretty much guarantee you that at the end of long before the end, during the course of your experience and at the end, you will be able to regard it truly as educational. Now, this next thing that I want to mention, you might not have thought of, but gosh, I think of it a lot. Not only with Up With People, but with other kinds of experience. But the Up With People experience is sensual. What? Not for me to, cut that out. When I say sensual, all I mean is really that it is an experience that comes to you through your senses, as all experiences do, actually. Up With People is something that you see and hear and taste and touch and smell. Now let me just guide you through these senses and encourage you along these lines. First of all, let's think a little bit about seeing. Now, you may say, if you are a sighted person, you may say, hey, I've been seeing all my life. I don't think it's particularly tricky. Well, I do. I've discovered in my life that seeing is trickier than we sometimes believe it to be. I'll tell you one time when this really came home to me. I had suspected before, but this is the moment that it sort of dawned on me how difficult seeing can be. I was teaching at a Quaker boarding school outside of Philadelphia one time. I know, Philadelphia. And this boarding school was located in the middle of about 600 acres of Pennsylvania farmland, which is among the most beautiful countryside I have ever seen. And I had a class of freshman English students, and one day, I don't remember what prompted me to do this, but one day I gave them all sheets of manila paper, and I told them to look out the window of the classroom and draw what they saw. Now, what they saw when they looked out that window was some tilled fields, a barn, a silo, some trees, birds in the sky, clouds, and off in the distance, about a quarter of a mile, there was a little herd of cows. So these kids picked up their pencils and they started drawing. You know, people get very earnest when they draw. Their tongues kind of... Well, anyway, I collected the manila sheets in a few minutes, and here's what interested me about them. Every single person in the class, there were no exceptions that I recall, every single person in that class had drawn his or her version of the fields and the trees and the barn and the silo and the sky and the birds. And every single person had drawn that herd of cows. And in each herd of cows, there were little bitty, teeny little individual cows. And each individual cow had 4 individual little bitty legs. And each cow had little pointy ears and a tail. Some of the cows even had a dot for the eye. Now I ask you, can you see a cow's eye from 1/4 of a mile away? No. What does the cow look like from 1/4 of a mile away? Just a little blob. Not one person in that room drew a blob. Every single person drew a little individual cow. Those people were not really following the assignment. They were not drawing what they saw. They were drawing what they thought they saw. They were drawing what they had seen in the past. They were drawing what they knew very well, for heaven's sake, was out there. They were drawing what they understood, about the essence of cowness. But they were not drawing what they saw. I think one of the great challenges in Up With People, one of the great challenges for you, is to learn to distinguish between what you really, really see and what you think you see. Or what you see now and what you have seen in the past. Or what you see and what you think people expect you to see. Very tricky business. There is the matter of hearing. Now, you are going to do a lot of that. You are just going to hear and hear and hear. Because, well, first of all, there are going to be a lot of people like me who stand up in front of you and go blah, 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 and you're going to have to just hear it and hear it and hear it. And you're going to have to listen to the staff, and you're going to listen to each other, and you're going to listen to your host families. I have some memories of listening to host families that are still rather vivid, and that was 25 years ago. As I recall it, when you move into a host home, and let's say you're going to stay there, I think our average was 4 days. Say you're going to stay in a host home 4 days. The first night, everything is wonderful. Everybody behaves. Everybody's trying pretty hard. Second night, you begin to see little, About the third night, after everybody goes to bed, the host mother would say to me, well, as long as you're here, let me just talk to you about a few things. And then she would begin. She would begin telling me things that I didn't have any business knowing. She would begin dragging the old skeletons out of the host closet. And I would sit there going, oh, no, really? Oh my goodness. Oh, heaven's sake, tell me a little bit more about that one. And then, sometimes I would go back to my bedroom and I would scribble as much as I could remember of the conversation into my journal, thinking that someday I would write such a complex novel. I never have. If I did, and I only marketed it to former Up With People, I could become quite wealthy, you realize. Anyway, lots and lots of hearing. And hearing requires a certain discrimination. It requires a certain effort. I'll tell you about a hearing experience I had in '72. I was with Up With People in Munich for the Olympic Games, 1972. Remember those? That was that awful Olympic Games when the terrorists held prisoners and ended up killing people. It was terribly, horribly dramatic. But anyway, we were there to perform in the Olympic Village for the athletes. And we lived in a little village outside of Munich called Ulm. And when I got to Ulm and I moved into the host home there, I was carrying, and maybe you do this too. Do you have, I see some of you do, tape recorders? Yeah. I carried my little tape recorder, and sometimes I would send letters home. I'd just sit down and say, dear mom and dad, or dear whoever, blah, blah, here's what's happening today. And so I had done one of those, and I listened to it, and I thought, well, that's kind of boring, really. just my voice droning on. So I thought, I know, instead of just sending a tape home of my voice, I'll take the tape out into the city with me and make kind of a little radio program. So I thought this was such a brilliant idea. So I took my tape, and every day I went from Ulm into Munich on a tram. So I was waiting for the tram, and when I saw it coming, I turned on the tape recorder. Now I still have this tape also, up there on the closet shelf with my journals. And you can hear, ding, ding, the tram coming. You can hear the doors, the automatic doors open. You can hear me getting on, dropping a few coins in the slot. The guy says, Danke, and I say, Bitte, the extent of my German at the time. And I got on the tram, and I remember, we were going that way. The seats, though, were facing this way, and I was looking at the people on the other side, who were facing this way. And I was still holding up my tape recorder saying, well, I'm on my way to Munich. People across from me are staring. We actually, I guess at that point I was going from my home into the city of Ulm, and I got into Ulm and walked out into the center of the city, and the marketplace was in full activity, people selling flowers, the bells in the cathedral were ringing, and I was holding up my tape recorder the whole time. And I went into the cathedral, and just at that moment, someone began playing the violin. Someone was rehearsing for a program that was to happen there later in the day. And I said, I just got here. I think somebody's rehearsing for a violin concerto. The sports palace where we had school was on the banks of the Danube. Now, it's one thing to say, Dear Mom and Dad, today I walked down to the Danube. It's another thing to hold the tape recorder over the river and go, this is it. This is the Danube. The interesting thing about all this was that I realized that when I had my tape recorder in my hand, I was hearing more. I noticed more. Oh, there's this to hear, there's that to hear. Sometimes you can walk through the day and not even realize what you're hearing. Not even pay very much attention to it. I'm suggesting to you that you pay a whole lot of attention to what you hear, because that's where part of the experience is. There is the matter of touching, sensual touching. Now this, can take a lot of different forms. For instance, we'll get to that. I used to think when we were headquartered in Tucson, which is unbearably hot in the summer, of course, and people were flying in, from Norway and Sweden and places where it is frequently cold, and they'd step off the plane and it was like, touching means experiencing things through your skin. And Tucson is a place you experience through your skin. Tucson almost hurts sometimes. It's so hot. I could list the whole catalog of touching experience. One that I always think of for some reason is the feel of clean laundry. This comes so rarely when you get out on the road. So it becomes a cherished experience, the feel of clean laundry. One of my favorite things was to move into a host home and to have the host mother say to me, "Bring unto me all of your dirty laundry, and I will make it clean." Yes, yes. She used to do that for me, and I used to take this big bundle of clean stuff back to my bedroom and just sort of fondle it, Now, of course, there is the matter of touching behaviors. That is the way in which people do or do not put their hands on each other. You have probably already noticed that Up With People is a fairly touchy, huggy kind of, yes. kind of environment. You know, the interesting thing is that studies have shown that in general, Americans are not terribly touchy. There are other cultures that are much more likely to come in physical contact with each other. I certainly learned this when I was on the road. In fact, I remember one time when we were in Spain, we had been on a long, long bus trip. And I had meant to tell the PR team that when we got to Bilbao, I wanted to stay in a hotel. You know, I knew I was going to be tired. I might not have the energy to be as pleasant as one needs to be in a host home. But I forgot to tell them, so, you know, I was stuck. I had to do it. So we got there, pulled into the parking lot of, you know, your local, whatever it was. And I guess you know how this works. When you arrive in a town, the PR team gives you an allocation packet. And on the front of it is your name and also the name of a host, of the host that you will be staying with. And usually that host is given a number. And you are given the number. And so when you hold your number up, your host can identify you. Now, sometimes the PR team gets creative, and instead of using numbers, they use various other symbols. Like, for instance, you have to moo or oink or quack or something. You were given an animal, and you have to go out there and start quacking until some host also starts quacking, and then you go home with that person, both of you just quacking away. I always preferred numbers myself, so tidy. Well, anyway, these were numbers, and I was given my allocation packet, and I stepped out into the parking lot of this place, and the host families were lined up over there. And in Spain, I always found that the host families were particularly eager for us. I mean, they wanted us. And so I saw them all, you know, just like this. And I knew that when I held up my number, some part of that bunch was going to, you know, come over and get me and put me in their car and take me home. So anyway, when I could manage it, I held up my number. And when I did, I saw this little bunch of people out there just sort of, you know, activate. And they started running across the parking lot in my direction in a kind of a V shape. And in the very front of it was an elderly woman whom I assumed was the grandmother of this bunch. And when they got to me, I was going, when they got to me, this woman leaped up off the pavement and threw her arms around my neck. And really, I was holding her like this, going, oh my. And this is pretty, you know, we stayed there like 8 days. This is pretty much where she was the entire time. You know, after traveling in Europe a while, where people have a tendency to touch each other more than they do in the United States, I got to the point where I couldn't keep my hands off people. You know, I really got into this touching thing. When I got back to America with my friends, they would say, "Leave me alone. What are you doing?" Oh, dear. Okay, what about smelling, you say? Oh, no. Well, once again, up with people can be a pretty odoriferous experience. Now, of course, you know, when I say that, honestly, the first thing that comes to my mind are just, you know, the smells that are kind of consistent with road life and various geographical areas. One of the first trips I made for Up With People, I went by myself to attend a convention or something in San Francisco. I'd never been to San Francisco. And I can still remember going out on Fisherman's Wharf, you know, just going, oh, my. I mean, Fisherman's Wharf smells a lot like a fisherman's wharf. And sourdough bread and all these wonderful, wonderful smells. And during the course of the years, you know, I came to learn, to experience the smell of an English pub and the smell of the Paris metro. there's still times if I'm standing on a corner in New York City and a bus goes by and blows exhaust in my face, I think, reminds me of the Paris metro. You know, not many people can get that kind of satisfying experience from exhaust fumes. I've been in zoos all over the world. I know the smell of a cheap motel room, sort of a combination of cigar smoke and disinfectant or something. You know. I know the smell of nursing homes. I know the smell of the Sara Lee factory outside of Chicago. Oh, this is one of the all-time great smell experiences I have ever had. Sara Lee, as some of you may not know, is a baking company in the United States, and they do sweet rolls and cheesecakes. The day I got there, they were making their own graham crackers. The smell of graham crackers, and yeast and butter, and oh my. And the taste experience that day wasn't bad either. But anyway, some days at the end of the day when I would write in my journal, I would just record some of the things I had smelled that day. Kind of interesting. You know, smells really bring things back. I read one time, years and years ago, that smells call up memories faster than any of the other senses. I mean, haven't you ever been somewhere and just gone, this smells like my childhood or something? Yeah. Okay, now, of all the senses, I think the one that people are most delicate about is their sense of taste. You know, people will say, I'll look at it and I can touch this and that, but when it comes to actually placing it between my teeth, and tasting this, I don't know. People aren't very good sports about this sometimes. Well, I'm telling you that if you're open to it, you will taste some things while you're up with people that you haven't even been able to identify. I mean, people are going to put things on your plate that you never saw before. And at that point, you can either run screaming from the room, saying, we don't eat this in St. Louis, Missouri, or whatever, or you can, by golly, just pick up your utensils and go for it. It makes an experience worth writing about, I'll tell you. Again, I mean, I went to a lot of places, but a lot of these stories seem to come from Spain. But I was staying in Barcelona one time with a family, none of whom spoke a word of English. I mean, zero. This is an experience you really ought to have, being in a home where nobody speaks your language. And anyway, but the hostess spoke to me a lot. I never understood very much, but it did not keep her from sharing a lot of her thoughts with me. But anyway, one day she came up to me and she said in Spanish, today is Saint somebody's day, Saint Cecilia's day. It's always Saint somebody's day in Spain, pretty much. And so we're having the whole family over. I mean, this is the grannies and the aunts and the cousins and everybody. And I'm going to fix a big, big dinner. She said, do you like pulpos? And my answer to pretty much anything was, sí. Sí. Of course, I had no idea what a pulpo was. But anyway, that night we gathered around the table for the dinner, and I was sort of the guest of honor, I guess because I didn't speak Spanish, I don't know. And the woman came in with a platter. I was sitting down and she was standing up, so I couldn't see into the platter. She was holding this platter from which steam was rising, and it smelled pretty good. And anyway, she took a fork and she stabbed something on the platter, and then she put it in my plate. And I looked down, and stretched across my plate in a kind of tomatoey sauce was a small octopus. I mean, all 8 legs, with the little suction cups on them. And I looked down at that, and I looked back up at her, and I said, pulpo. And then it was her turn to say, sí. And everybody at the table was looking at me. I knew that they knew that I had never had a pulpo before in my life. And they were just waiting to see what happens. Well, fortunately, what happened to me at that moment, as this is something that happens to me at a lot of major moments in my life, I went into a little coma. This is in order to get through some difficult moments. You just kind of... And as a result, I don't even remember very much about what happened. What happened after that. But I do know that I picked up my knife and my fork, and I began up at the head end. No. And I put my first bite of pulpo in my mouth. Now, I don't really remember the taste. I don't remember that it tasted all that fishy or anything. I do remember the texture. It was sort of like an art gum eraser. I felt like I was eating it, like it was going boing, 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 boing. But I'm telling you, I ate every morsel of that thing. I mean, the little legs. Everything. And, of course, it made a great entry in my journal. A lot of experiences, you might say even at some points, this isn't all that much fun at this moment, but boy, it's going to make a great story someday. You can get by on that. Just a few years ago, long after I was off the road with other people, one of the casts invited me to come visit them in Australia. I said, ooh, yes. I had never been to that part of the world. So I flew to Sydney, and I did some work with the cast, and I had 8 days after I finished with them to do whatever I wanted. And so I interviewed everybody. What should I do? They had been there like 2 months or something, so I wanted them. And I bet 75% of them said, you get yourself up to the Great Barrier Reef, and you go snorkeling. I mean, I'm not all that much of a water person. I hadn't even brought a suit with me. But that's what I did. I went up to the Great Barrier Reef. I took a boat out to the reef. I put on all that stuff, stuck one of those tubes in my mouth and everything, and jumped overboard. And I said to the friend who was with me later, I said, this is one of the few trips I've ever made where I could tell you the single most wonderful moment of the entire 2 weeks. And she said, when was that? I said, it was the moment I first put my head underwater at the Great Barrier Reef. What I wanted to do at that moment was to go, but I didn't know much about snorkeling. I did know, however, that you don't go, But, I thought afterwards, you could go to Australia, you could go to Cairns, which is the city from which you take the boat out to the reef. I saw some people, as a matter of fact, who were standing on the shore in this beach resort area and looking out like this, saying, oh yeah, that's the Great Barrier Reef out there, yeah. And then they go home and they say, well, I've seen the Great Barrier Reef. Or there were people who got on the boat and went all the way out there and just went, yep, there it is, the Great Barrier Reef. Never got the hair wet. You could take this little submarine type thing and go beneath the surface of the water and look out through the little hole and see whatever happened to swim by. But there was always, glass between you and the experience. Or you could, by golly, jump in, where your lips turn blue and your skin gets wrinkled and your hair, but you have the whole experience. I am just suggesting to you that in all these categories, you, by golly, just jump in. Just jump in, have the total experience, and then write about it. All right, another point I want to make here, which you've probably already suspected, is that the Up With People experience is cultural. Now, when I say cultural, I don't mean exotic or necessarily even foreign. A culture is any group of people that has sort of agreed to do things a certain way. You come from the culture of your home and the culture of your hometown and the culture of the school from which you graduated. Up With People itself, of course, is a culture. And in Up With People, one of the neat things is that you keep getting dropped down into the middle of different cultures where people do things in different ways. One of the first really identifiably cultural experiences I had when I joined up with people happened in the United States. It happened in Dover, Delaware. A friend of mine and I were allocated in the home of a little African-American woman whose first name, I don't remember her last name, whose first name was Olive. And we got to Olive's home. She was very excited about having us. And she took us inside. And I could smell, I was having a smell experience immediately. I could smell something. She took us back to the kitchen, and on the kitchen stove was cooking this huge pot of greens. Now, my mother, I don't know, I don't think my mother ever fixed a pot of greens. Green stuff maybe, but not greens. And I looked around Olive's living room, and there were framed pictures everywhere. You know, pictures of people graduating, and pictures of people getting married, and pictures of people apparently on vacation, all that kind of stuff. And I looked around at all those, and I thought, well, isn't that interesting? All the people in all of these pictures are black. All the people in all the pictures in my house are white. I had never been in the home of a black person, and I was 32 years old. Well, I'm telling you, we had a heck of a time at Olive's. This woman was wild. She wore a wig that didn't quite fit. It was a gray wig. I mean, you could sort of get your hands up inside of it like this. She wore a lot of really red lipstick, and she loved Up With People, and she loved the show. And in fact, she is the only host family I've ever had, personally, who really, truly danced in the aisles at the show. I mean, she was out there. She was rocking. She was. And we'd go home, and she'd play her radio at the most well, it wouldn't be unbelievable to you, I'm sure. To me, it was the most unbelievable volume I have ever experienced. So you know, she was having a cultural experience with us, and we were having a cultural experience with her, and it all just worked out very nicely indeed. I thought, I've learned something here. Now, the first European cultural experience I had was in Bruges, Belgium. Let's hear it for Bruges, Belgium, for goodness sake. Yeah, of course. One of the loveliest European cities I've ever been in. And we went to the sports palace, of course, and waited for our host to come. And my host arrived. I was very thrilled to learn his name was Paul Verskuur, and he was Flemish, but he taught English in the local high school. Great. Paul spoke English. He came after me in a little car. I had heard tales about Belgian drivers. And I want to tell you that they aren't bad enough. Those stories are not bad enough. I was so terrified on the way home. I mean, I was holding on to the door handle going, the whole time he took me home. And while we were on the way, he said, you know, I won't be able to drive you to school every day. And I thought, well, thank God for that. But he said, what I can do for you, I'm going to give you a bicycle. And I said, oh, well, great. The bike is good. I said, exactly how far do you live from the sports arena? And he said, 8 miles. So I learned that I was going to travel 16 miles on a bicycle every single day we were in Bruges. Well, anyway, the next day when I went to work for the first time, I had my lunch, my briefcase, my purse, and an umbrella on the bicycle. And it was sprinkling. But by the time I got to the little place, which, you know, the place in lots of European towns is a place in the center of the town, and the streets radiate out from it like this, I started sailing into the place on my bicycle, and I looked around, and there were Up With people on bikes coming from almost everywhere. And we all started ringing our bells, you know, and like, hey! Really? It was ecstatic. Of course, after so many days of 16 miles on cobblestone streets, for the most part, I think my teeth had come loose from my gums. My internal organs, you know, were in disarray. But here's the neat thing about the Verskure family. Paul's wife, Mia, spoke a little bit of English, not too much, and they had two little girls, two darling little blonde girls who are now probably 37 years old. But anyway, these little girls, could barely speak Flemish, much less English. They'd probably never even heard English before. So here this person moved into their house and started making these very strange sounds that they couldn't understand. I mean, they would look at me like, what? And they'd come up to me with their crayons and their coloring books, and they'd, say, Geflünken Schneitenfläsen, and I'm going... And really, they were so disappointed. Their mother told me later that they thought I was so peculiar that they never even referred to me with the personal pronoun. They called me it. They asked her that first night, they said, is it going to stay for dinner? Is it going to sleep here? And then after I was around for a while, they said, is it ever going to leave? Cultural experiences all around. They might still be talking about that weird person who lived in their home one day. Well, I'm telling you, or I should say, I could tell you literally hundreds of stories about cultural experiences I had. The time in Gonzaga, Italy, I lived with a woman named Adelaide Lasagna. And she didn't have a bed for me, so I slept on a lawn chair. That was interesting. The place in Charleroi, Belgium, where they didn't have running water, and so the woman would heat water on the stove and then pour it over my head when it was time for me to wash my hair. When I came back to Up With People in '81, I went to visit a cast in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. Oh, stop it. Are you honestly from Moose Jaw? Get out of here. I'll tell you one thing, when you're holding a ticket that says Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, you pretty much know you're going to have a cultural experience of some sort. And when I got there, I learned that the cast had been divided into two parts. Half of them were going to go off and do a show someplace, and the other half was going to visit a Hutterite community. I'd never even heard of Hutterites, and I don't know if you have either, but they are a little bit like the Amish in that they live a very reclusive, secluded kind of life. They don't interact very much with other people. They all live together. They have their individual family homes, but they share a common kitchen. They don't have, they live the simplest possible life. No electricity, no nothing, So anyway, we were being briefed before going to visit the Hutterites, and, we said, you really have to kind of cool it here, and we need to be on our best behavior, and you might not get to go inside any of the homes, and don't take any pictures. They don't believe in taking pictures, and we're going to have to tone down the show. As a matter of fact, we couldn't even use any musical instruments. We were going to do a little piece, 2 or 3 numbers. Couldn't use any musical instruments, not even an acoustic guitar. They didn't believe in musical instruments. So anyway, we got there. Just as the Hutterite women, we all met in the kitchen, just as they were pulling out of the oven big trays of homemade yeast rolls. The smell in that room was so wonderful. And we all sat at tables with those rolls and big crocks of sweet butter. And that's how we sort of got to know each other, talking over rolls and butter. And then it was time for the Up With people to do the little show. So they got up there, and like I said, they couldn't use any instruments, so they started by going, and then they started saying, little bitty choreography like this. But these folks loved it. Oh, they clapped and clapped and carried on. They thought that was just wonderful. And after it was over, one of them said, could we sing something for you? We said, oh my gosh, yes. Now, I have to tell you that the women in this group, the women all looked exactly alike. Now, I'm not talking approximately or sort of. I'm saying, do you understand what I'm saying? Exactly alike. You couldn't see their hair. They were all wearing kind of babushka type things. Those who wore glasses wore little round glasses, wire, kind of oval faces, like faces you see in the paintings of old masters or something, sort of watery eyes. And they looked to me like they were in costume, of course. They had these kind of crinoline skirts and aprons and all. Anyway, they got up to sing. And boy, I wish I'd had my tape that day, because this music was among the loveliest stuff I have ever heard. They sounded, they sang in like 9-part harmony or something, no accompaniment whatsoever. And it was kind of like a combination, I thought at the time it sounds like a combination of German kind of oompa, oompa, that kind of stuff, and Western twang or something. We were all just, I was like one big goosebump the whole time. I thought I was going to burst into tears. And what I thought at the time is what I thought a million times while I was out on the road. I thought I would never be here if I weren't associated with Up With People. An ordinary civilian like me couldn't have just walked right into the Hutterite community and say, hello, I'd like to have a yeast roll, and just walk around. Anybody want to sing for me? No. That happened because I was an Up With People person. And so, you're on the verge of more cultural experiences than I could possibly prepare you for. And the objective, of course, is to learn from each of them. All right, now here's something. This next point I developed when I was here in the 80s. And as part of my responsibility as educational consultant, I developed a questionnaire that we gave to people halfway through the Up With People experience. And the questionnaire, asked a whole lot of things. One of the things that it asked was, what should we have told you during staging that we forgot to tell you? What was it, do you think, we neglected to say at staging that would have been useful to you as you went out on the road? And you know what? The answer that appeared far more than any other was this. People said, somebody should have told us that the Up With People experience is hard. And I thought, I'm never going to stand up in front of an Up With People audience again without making it my responsibility to say to them, look, guys, this experience on which you are embarking is hard. It is very hard. It is hard. Do you hear me? Hard, 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 very, very hard. But, I figure that's okay. We kind of get into hard experiences, things that are difficult. I read one time that Charles de Gaulle said, a man of character finds a special attractiveness in difficulty, since it is only by coming to grips with difficulty that he can realize his potential. I'm telling you that you are going to realize your potential like crazy this year if you come to grips with the difficulties that Up With People will present, and there will be many of them. I just now I had this little flashback of sitting on a bus, like at 4 o'clock in the morning in some Italian town. We were all going to get cholera shots or something. It was the only time it could happen. Or no, somebody was coming on the bus and giving us shots because somebody in the group, I don't know. Anyway, I'm sitting there, at 4 o'clock getting a shot, thinking, this is really hard. This is hard. I used to come to Colorado every summer. I came to Colorado every summer for like 13 years, starting in 81. To spend some time in a little town south of here called Lake City, right in the middle of the San Juan Mountains. Gorgeous, gorgeous place. And twice when I was in Lake City, I climbed Uncompahgre Peak, which is a 14,000-foot mountain. The last time I did it I wanted to do it after I was 50, just to see if I could. I did, too. I ought to do it, well, no, I started to say I ought to do it one more time now that I'm, that other number. But I don't know. Anyway, the thing I remember about climbing Uncompahgre, I remember climbing it with my sister and my brother-in-law one time on a Sunday morning, and we got way, way, way up there on the trail someplace, and I was kind of leading the way, and I went behind this rock, and I just leaned against it, kind of trying to get my breath, and my sister came around the curve, and poor thing, she was just red in the face and panting and hair standing on end, and she said, "Why are we doing this?" And I said, "Because it's hard." I really think she wanted to haul off and just sock me in the jaw. But that is why people climb mountains, isn't it? Because it's hard. You get to the top and you go, yay. Well, I'm going to tell you about the hardest thing I have ever done in my whole life. It wasn't exactly an Up With People experience, although I did it with an Up With People friend. I was living in Tucson at the time. She lived in Phoenix, and she had been after me and after me. She said, "Carolyn, we need to go hike in the Grand Canyon." I said, "I don't think so." And she, again and again, let's do. I finally said, "Oh, all right." I drove up to Phoenix. We got in the car and we drove to the north rim of the Grand Canyon, which, as trails go, is the more difficult of the two main trails, but also very, very beautiful. So we camped out on the ledge of the Grand Canyon at night, and the next morning, very, very early, although this was like the end of August, and it was going to be 94 degrees before the day was over, very early in the morning, we got up and we started our descent. Now, let me just say there is a major, major significant difference between mountain climbing and canyon hiking. In mountain climbing, ostensibly, you do the hard part first, and then you do then you just have to get down. You can roll down if you have to. But in canyon hiking, you do what people tell you is the easy part first. That is, you go down, way, way down. And then you have to try to get back up. Now, when we got about a third of the way down, I said to my friend Marcy, hold it, wait a second. I want you to come over here and look at my legs. She came over and my legs were going like this. And I said, these are the same legs I'm going to have to use to get out of here. And I'm very concerned about them. They seem to have a life of their own all of a sudden. Margie says, nah, you'll be fine, let's go. Go down, 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 down. At one point, I noticed that there was a little helicopter pad. I said, what's this? Well, occasionally people are not able to make it out, in which case they have to be helicoptered from the top. So, oh, gosh. Down, 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 more down, down, all the way down to the river. We got to the river, we took off our shoes, we stuck our feet in, we had some peanut butter crackers, some Gatorade. I took off the bandana that had been around my neck and dunked it in the water and tied it around my head, and we started back up. It is now, 92 degrees. Here's the way the Grand Canyon is constructed. When you're coming back up out of it, the first third is about like this. Not too bad. The second third is about like this. And the third is sort of like this. Actually, it feels like it's like this, but I know that couldn't be. But anyway, we did maybe the first third of the return trip, and I said, hold it. I said, Marcy, something's wrong. Everything's starting to look like an exposed photograph or something. She said, oh my goodness, you're fainting. Sit down on that rock and stick your head between your knees, which I did. More Gatorade. Okay, up and out. So we're doing the second third. By this time, I'm getting very weary, and my knees aren't working very well anymore. I'm covered with mud. My hair is standing on end in sort of greasy spikes. I have grit between my teeth, filth, everywhere. I'm sweating all over myself, big salt stains on my T-shirt. One thing I remember about the second third is that there was another woman with us who was behind us. Marcy was in front at this point, and this other woman was behind. I think they had in mind that if things got really bad, they could do a kind of a pull-push thing, get me up the hill. But anyway, this woman behind me, whose name I no longer remember, the whole time we were doing that second third, kept clapping her hands and saying to me, "Keep up the good work, Carolyn. Keep it up. You're really looking good. You're looking good." Now, truly, I have repressed a lot of this experience, but one thing I did know then, and I do know now, is that I was not looking good. By the time we got to the last part of that second third, I'll tell you how tired I was. I was so tired that when we came to the mule poop on the trail, I didn't even step over it. I just walked right through. I didn't care. I didn't care. Then we got to the third third, which is a system of railroad ties, in steps. But the steps are too far apart. It means that every one of them, you have to put your foot up on it like this, and then you have to raise your entire body weight with this muscle right here. And you do that, 42,000 times. I say to you that the North Trail, the Kaibab Trail it's called, is very beautiful. I don't know whether it is or not. Could be. It could be. Mostly, I just saw my feet and my dirty socks and spots before my eyes. Anyway, finally, as we're clawing our way up the third, I thought I heard a car in the parking lot. I went, "Oh, God, civilization, a car." And it motivated me to, scratch my way to and when I got to, here was the grassy area in the parking lot, and I heaved myself up over that thing and just threw myself on the grass. I was laughing, I was crying, I was saying things that didn't make any sense. My two friends were standing there looking down at me going, "Oh my gosh." Finally, they sort of scooped me up and they put me in the car, and they took me to the lodge where you can take a 10-minute shower for $1 or something. The shower is like a laundromat for people. It has these slots where you drop the quarters in and you go like this, and then you just stand there in the hot water. Well, I was only partially conscious at the time, but I'm watching the water come on. I look down, and every manner of filth and debris and clay and mud and straw and everything was, going down the drain. I started getting sort of lighter and lighter. And I washed my hair, and I put on some clean jeans and a sweatshirt, and I'm telling you, I felt like Superwoman. I had gotten out of the Grand Canyon without the aid of a helicopter, mind you. And I felt unbelievably powerful. There's something about getting to the top of the mountain. When we left there, we went back to Phoenix, where Marcy lived, and I noticed that she had a book about Colorado trails. And so I started looking through it, and I found the Kaibab Trail, the one that we had just done. And it said, first of all, it said in big, bold letters at the top, "Never, under any circumstances, attempt this hike in one day."